Well, since everyone and their dog is releasing a UFC GOAT list, I thought I'd go why I hate the UFC GOAT list, why I hate the debate, why I hate the idea of it. And the first reason is the GOAT list is way too subjective. I've got 4 different lists from GOAT number 1 to GOAT number 5, just a top 5 GOAT list. What do you notice about all of these lists? First thing, completely different fighters and orders. It's a complete different mix and match. Yes, there'll be some fighters who feature in different lists because they have to, but it's a completely different order. The second thing is they're all fairly acceptable. Despite being different fighters, different orders, all jumbled up, they're all fairly acceptable. What I'm trying to say is the entire GOAT list is literally just a bundle of the exact same fighters in everyone's list. The only difference is some of the orders might be different by 2 or 3 spots. It's just the same jumble of fighters. You don't need to explain why they're great. And on top of that, there's no criteria. Some people might favor resume, which is where they might have Makachev or Topuria or Volkanovski quite high. Some people might have defenses, which is where you want to favor towards Mighty Mouse and John Jones and Anderson Silva. Some people might like the perfect record, guys like fighters like Khabib and GSP. Some people might like skill, like Arman Sarukian and Peter Yan. Some people might favour longevity with fighters like Aldo and John Jones and Fedor. Some people might favour pioneerism with like guys like McGregor and Royce Gracie. Some people might have absolutely no tolerance for steroids, and the second steroids are brought up, no tolerance. Some people just dismiss steroids. They don't care about it. It doesn't enter the discussion. You know, you can say Jones is the GOAT, but he's taken steroids. You can say Mighty Mouse is the GOAT. Who's he beat? You can say Topuria is the GOAT, but he's got 1 defense. You can say Silva's the GOAT, but he's got 11 losses. Every GOAT has asterisks as well. And I feel like GOAT lists as well nowadays, it isn't about who made the best list, who had the best placements. It's just who had the least diabolical names on their list, who had the worst, who had the less amount of bad placements, who had the least diabolical names on their GOAT list. You could have had the most perfect list known to man, literally by statistics, but you're still going to get called a casual. You're still going to say, how is this dude over this dude? You know, this guy's way too high, this guy's way too low. So number 1, I just think the GOAT list is way too subjective. There's no right or wrong answer. It's the exact same fighters in everybody's top 10, top 15, just jumbled about in different positions. There's no need to explain it. And when there is an anomaly, that's where it just starts a bit of a conversation. But generally, it's just way too subjective and it's getting boring. Second reason is you can't really compare modern fighters to older generation fighters. There's this kind of new debate going around that modern fighters should be favoured over older fighters. I disagree. Now, skill-wise, 100% goes without saying, modern fighters of this generation are way better back then than where they were back then in terms of skill. But let's take Anderson Silva, for example. He isn't as skilled as today's top middleweights, even though he was massively ahead of his time, and I still think he could compete with some guys in the current middleweight division. It's no surprise the sport has evolved, skill has evolved, and fighters nowadays are just better than how Anderson Silva was. But he still dominated his era of middleweight, setting records, was absolutely ahead of his time. And then you might say, okay, but all middleweights back then sucked. Doesn't that make it more impressive for Anderson Silva to be so far ahead of every middleweight in his era? I mean, you look at the conversations online about Anderson Silva against today's middleweight division, and a lot of people still think he could compete with even like the title contenders in the top 5. And talking of the middleweight division, this was the middleweight top 6. This was the middleweight top 6 4 years ago, by the way, so it hasn't evolved that much. But for example, let's take Chuck Liddell and Khalil Roundtree, both guys who fought in the light heavyweight division. Who wins in a fight? It's Khalil Roundtree. Who's more skilled? It's Khalil Roundtree. Who beat more skilled opponents? It's Khalil Roundtree. But surely that means Roundtree's better, right? No, it doesn't, because Chuck Liddell obviously defended his belt multiple times, was a champion, a pioneer of the sport, and even though Roundtree's more skilled in every aspect, Chuck Liddell's still a greater fighter. And you might say that modern fighters should be favoured over older fighters. Yes, in the pound-for-pound debate, they should be, because it's about skill in the pound-for-pound debate. But in the GOAT debate, I don't think you can really compare them. So my second argument is that you can't really compare modern fighters to older gen fighters, because there's a skill differential, it's different eras, it's hard to kind of intervene between the different eras. So that's my second reason. Third one is the list updates way too often for it to have any legitimacy. The UFC's been around for 31 years. How can there be a new GOAT list every 6 months? I understand the UFC is still fairly green, but for there to be a new list like every 3 to 6 months when the sport's been around for so long. Dricus du Plessis 2 fights ago wasn't even in the top 50 of most people's list. Now he's considered in the top 15. Some people might even go as far to say he's in the top 10. The new method for a GOAT list is there'll be a new UFC champion, they'll defend 2 to 3 times, and suddenly they're one of the greatest of all time in the top 20 because modern fighters are over older fighters, and you know, this is a hot take apparently nowadays. Like Anderson Silva, for example, people say he's overrated. From 2016 to 2021, it was the same fighters in the GOAT debate, the same fighters you'd expect, the same legends. Now suddenly in 2024 and 2025, there's this whole new wave of fighters entering the GOAT list. A new champion defends 2 or 3 times and they're now one of the greatest of all time. I think GOAT list should at minimum be a yearly thing, not every 3 months, because then it takes away the legitimacy of a list. Like Khabib retires, now suddenly he's a GOAT. Volk nearly beats Islam, now suddenly he's the GOAT. Islam remains the champion since beating Moicano, now he's the GOAT. And now Tuco Tacos exists, now people are calling him the GOAT. So just wait for, the things to get moving. I think the list updates way too often for it to have any legitimacy. If it's a GOAT list, it should be towards the end of their career, which brings me on to my 4th point, which is most GOAT lists have bias or intentional rage bait. Like we said before, the GOAT list is literally just a bundle of the exact same fighters in every list, mixed and matched. If every GOAT list didn't have an anomaly, they'd be pointless, there'd be no discussion, and they'd be boring without an anomaly. So I feel like nowadays it's kind of common to rage bait. Like everyone knows GSP is one of the GOATs, everyone knows Makachev is, everybody knows Fedor is. So now they've got to slide in different fighters who are out of place just to get a conversation sparking, because let's be honest, if every list was the same, it'd be boring. So they just take any decent fighter on the roster and slide them in the GOAT list, or they'll say a hot take and they'll just display a take that's awful, or they'll downplay fighters. They'll say things like Aldo's not a GOAT, he lost 10 times, but then they'll glaze Topuria, who hasn't even got an ounce of Aldo's longevity. They'll say things like Demetrius Johnson's overrated, but then they'll caress Pantoja, who has 2 good names on his resume as well. They'll say, oh, GSP ain't even in the top 10, but then they'll pay for a twitted play check. Or they'll say things like Usman's over GSP. I just feel like nowadays it's not about, like I said at the beginning, not about who has the better list, who can have the most bad takes in the list and spark of a discussion over it more. So most of them, they have bias or intentional rage bait to get people talking about them, because let's be honest, if it was a legitimate GOAT list that was fair, no one would be talking about it. I'd have no conversation around it. Number 5. You can't really include fighters who are in the middle of their career. For example, I keep talking about Anderson Silva. Let's say Anderson Silva and Ilia Topuria. I think most people nowadays would conclude that Topuria is greater than Silva, and I'm not necessarily dismissing that. But if Anderson Silva retired after beating Stephan Bonner, on that big winning streak at 33-4, I think most people would definitely consider Anderson Silva greater than Topuria and probably the top 3, maybe the number 1 greatest of all time. And look at Khabib, for example. This guy retired mid-career. The narrative when he was active and when he immediately retired was he's the GOAT. He's top 5 of all time. He's got the perfect record. I mean, look at the comment section under his retirement video. Everyone's calling him the GOAT. Undisputed, undeniable GOAT. The narrative now around Khabib is that he's not even in the top 10. He's overrated. He beat nobody. Let's use Ilia Topuria for another example. The narrative now around Topuria is he's top 7, maybe top 5, already one of the GOATs. What if he retired today? Because I can guarantee a couple of years from now, the debate about Topuria would be different. And it's just recency biased. Topuria's got a lot of momentum right now, and I'm just using Topuria as an example. Fighters nowadays that have a lot of momentum, people kind of ride on the momentum and look at the potential legacy that they can have, and then immediately exclaim that they're one of the greatest of all time. But if Topuria got chinned in his next fight by a different contender, or Islam Makhachev was to beat Ilia Topuria, even though that's not a shameful thing to do, I can guarantee people would be downplaying their placement of Ilia Topuria on the GOAT debate, saying he was never that good. Look at BJ Penn. He's a perfect example. BJ Penn's never mentioned in the GOAT list nowadays, but if he retired at 16-7, he'd be in the top 10 because of what he accomplished in the sport and how he beat so many different fighters across weight classes. And this means you're not ranking career versus career. You're ranking somebody's prime versus somebody else's entire career. Like, for example, Anderson Silva's discredited because of the end of his career and the amount of losses he took. You can't really discredit Topuria for that reason, because he hasn't really had a career that long to go on for. Like, a lot of fighters nowadays, it's just too early to call them GOATs when we don't know what the future holds. And these are the same people that will critique the losses of, like, Aldo and Silva, people who stayed around for so long. And you can easily just argue that and say, it's easy, we'll just change the GOAT list if they lose, no big deal. That goes back to my original point. The list updates way too often for it to have any legitimacy. So number 5, you can't really include fighters who are mid-career. It's unfair on fighters who have been around for a long time and have had long longevity, so wait for their career to be over. Number 6, and this is going to be a real quick one, how can you be a GOAT past the top 15? Like I said, you can't include fighters who are in the middle of their career, but you're either a GOAT or you're not. There's no in between. Like the debate about Cejudo or Adesanya, who's number 17 on the GOAT list? Neither of them, because they ain't GOATs. How can number 27 on somebody's GOAT list be a GOAT? You ain't a GOAT. Get away from the conversation. That's just a quick point. You can't really be a GOAT past the top 15. I think the GOAT list should be subjected to the top 15 or at least the top 10. So how I think the GOAT debate should be is, first of all the real GOATs, the ones that everyone can recognize and agree with, should be categorized as one. It's too subjective to rank. You can't argue that Demetrius Johnson's above above John Jones. You can't argue that John Jones is above GSP. You can't argue that GSP is above Makhachev. You can't argue that Makhachev is above DJ. They're all as one. They're all good, and for many different reasons, it's too subjective. You know what I mean? I'm not bothered about who you have in your GOAT list. As long as it's the same fighters, I think they should all be categorized as one in the GOAT conversation. Number 2, I think it's much easier to rank it by division. It's much easier to rank the GOATs of every division in some sort of actual list from top to bottom than it is in general. For example, how can you compare a modern bantamweight like Merab to an old middleweight like Anderson Silva? Like, you've got to take into account every, you know, subjective, I guess, category, as well as the stage of their career, the era that they're in, and the division that they're in as well. So it's much easier to rank by division. And third, skill should never be the leading factor. This isn't a pound for pound debate. No shit. Fighters nowadays are more skilled than they were 20 years ago. Does that mean they're greater? No, it doesn't, because again, the sport's evolved over time. The fighters that the GOATs back then were fighting have now evolved, and the GOATs themselves have now evolved. So I don't think skill should be a leading factor. I'm not bothered if you want to include it, because obviously skill's relevant, but I don't think it should be a leading factor in the GOAT debate. But that's just some reasons why I hate the idea of this GOAT conversation. It's just a bit boring. It's the same shit every 6 months. This guy's a GOAT over this guy. And then they'll have one hot take which kind of gets them the talking point. Let me know your thoughts and if you agree. And yeah, thank you for watching.